On this Thursday night, remembering a remarkable mother.
She's really delivered environmental engineering solutions to the world.
Tributes pour in for Madiha Salman, killed in the London attack. Plus, new details on the suspect. Giving up on the Green Party, why this MP is joining the Liberals. The ripple effects of killing Keystone XL, the impact on oil producers, Alberta's beleaguered Premier, and his $1.5 billion investment. Plus, trash talk.
The 7 main characters of the G7 conference.
The mountainous sculpture and the message behind it.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with developments in the murder investigation in London, Ontario. The man accused of running down and killing 4 members of the same family appeared in court today. There is new information about the suspect, including what his parents' divorce proceedings reveal about him. And though relatives of those who were killed say they want to remain private, we are getting a clearer picture of their role in the community. Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
Nathaniel Veltman appeared in court virtually, a grainy picture of a young man accused of a heinous act of violence. In his hometown of Strathroy, he went largely unnoticed. He and his family were known at Bethel Baptist Church, but hadn't attended in years. And even students who were in the same grade as he was in high school barely remember him.
People talk around town, like everybody knows everybody's name, but nobody really knows the people, I guess.
Court documents from his parents' divorce provide some details. They reveal his mother often locked the door to her room to avoid her son's badgering and argumentative behavior, and he wasn't allowed to be around his 5 siblings, including his twin sister, without supervision. His father released the family's first public statement since the killings today, saying it was with utmost shock and horror that it came to hear of the unspeakable crime committed last weekend. There are no words adequate to properly express my deep sorrow for the victims of this senseless act. For the Afzaal family and their loved ones, grief colors every attempt at remembrance. As tragic a story as it is, friends of the Afzaals don't want them remembered for this nondescript stretch of road. Western University engineering professor Jason Gerhard recruited Madiha Salman as a graduate student in 2008. She was enthusiastic, he said, and ready to embrace life in Canada from the start.
She said, "Oh, you don't need to worry about me. I have so much energy, nothing can stop me." And she said, you know, in my undergraduate degree in Pakistan, I was the only woman in a class of 174 students.
And she excelled at Western, developing a technology to remove toxins from contaminated soil. It's been used to clean up Toronto's waterfront.
What she's done is part of a larger picture, but she's really delivered environmental engineering solutions to the world.
She was remarkable, he says, an adjective used often to describe the Afzaal family. Dr. Ahmed Hegazi hasn't been able to talk about what happened to his friends until now. He sees them as remarkable in death as they were in life.
I want this family remembered as the family that would not want in this situation. Had Salman been alive with us now, he wouldn't have asked for revenge. He would have said, fight evil with good. And so when you do that, your enemy will become your friend.
And a multi-faith march will be held tomorrow night starting at 7 o'clock. It will travel 7 kilometers to the London Mosque, aiming to arrive at 8:45 p.m. to coincide with the time of the attack on Sunday. We're also learning the funerals will be held on Saturday, part of which will be open to the public. Sadly, 9-year-old Fayez, the only survivor of the attack, won't be able to attend because he's still in hospital. Donna?
A remarkable family. Mike Drolet in London, Ontario, thanks. Now to the pandemic and a warning in Ontario. New cases are dropping rapidly, but the highly transmissible Delta variant remains a wild card. New modeling shows it will likely become dominant in Ontario by early summer. Whether a 4th wave can be avoided depends on vaccines.
We need to get more vaccines out quickly, and we need to move quickly into second doses to help fight the Delta variant.
Ontario is accelerating the rollout of second doses in some hotspot regions. The Delta variant is much more contagious and can make people sicker. About 63% of Canadians have now had at least 1 dose, which is great progress, but that's not enough protection against the Delta variant. 2 doses are needed, and less than 10% of Canadians have had both. As Heather Yourex-West explains, that makes reopening plans risky.
It's a day many in Alberta have been waiting for. Under Stage 2 of the province's reopening plan, going to the movies, indoor dining, or a dip in the local pool is possible once again. Alberta is hoping to remove all restrictions soon, Stage 3 clearing the way for the start of the Calgary Stampede in less than a month's time.
We are not planning on setting any attendance records at this year's Stampede, but as well, we will have all the thrills and spills of Calgary Stampede.
But Alberta's former Chief Medical Officer of Health still believes that is a bad idea as cases of the more highly transmissible Delta variant rise.
If I were living in Calgary, one of the things that would concern me is that 85% of the Delta variant that's been found in the province is being found in Calgary.
Right now, Ontario is testing half of all positive cases for the Delta variant, identifying 434 cases as of its last update on June 3rd. In Western Canada, BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan are now screening all positive samples for Delta, with more than 200 cases detected in Alberta and more than 500 in BC.
To further stop the spread of COVID-19 and support Delta hotspots, we are further expanding booking eligibility for an accelerated second dose in select regions across the province.
Starting Monday, Ontario residents living in areas where Delta is spreading through the community can book a second dose. Alberta and BC have accelerated its second dose rollout too. But in Alberta, the demand for first doses has hit a plateau, about 100,000 short of the province's 70% goal.
Even if somebody gets a vaccine today, it's still a minimum of 2 weeks before they get the full protection of that vaccine.
As easing restrictions raise the stakes on another round of the vaccine variant race. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Leaders of some of the world's wealthiest nations, including Canada, are in Cornwall, England tonight for their first in-person G7 meeting in almost 2 years. Before it started, U.S. President Joe Biden met with Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He reaffirmed America's commitment to vaccine sharing to help supercharge the global immunization effort.
The United States will purchase 500 million doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine to donate to nearly 100 nations that are in dire need in the fight against this pandemic.
That is on top of the 80 million vaccine doses the U.S. has already pledged by the end of this month. Most of the big decisions and agreements are reached before these meetings actually happen, but the face-to-face talks, formal and informal, between the leaders matter too. There are big topics to address, including climate change and the pandemic. Abigail Bimman is traveling with the Prime Minister. Abigail?
Donna, before even boarding the plane, everyone needed to have 1 dose of the vaccine, a temperature check, and a negative PCR test. And when I told the person who took my information at the test clinic where the Prime Minister was headed, she said, does he know it's COVID? So clearly some mixed opinions on the decision to travel overseas.
My brother just lost all his legs and all his fingers.
Jonathan Mason feels helpless. Closed borders means he can't visit his brother in the U.S., but he still supports the person who closed the borders in crossing them.
I think it's very important that he starts to show the world that that we're not going to let this virus control us.
Justin Trudeau is representing Canada overseas for the first time since the pandemic began, to the UK for the G7 and then to Brussels for NATO and an EU summit. About 6 people from the Prime Minister's office are taking flight. Everyone, including the PM, will be subject to regular tests and other safety protocols. And when they return, the 2-week quarantine applies to all, though the Conservatives aren't happy the mandatory hotel stay will be in Ottawa, not one of the 4 approved cities for international flights.
He shouldn't travel to the UK. He should stay at the same hotel that everyone else has to, or he should scrap the hotel quarantine program.
If there's one person who should be considered essential, it should be our Prime Minister.
A former Conservative Foreign Affairs Minister says the Prime Minister shouldn't have to quarantine at all.
Let's not be partisan. Justin Trudeau should be there. It's important for Canadians that he's there representing our country, our values, and our interests.
Unlike some bigger summits, the G7 offers more opportunities for informal connections, critical in person, says a former personal representative to Trudeau.
But you can have a minute or two just in a corridor or in a stairwell, as I have had in the past, and work out a solution to a problem or get.
Senator Peter Beam says people aren't as candid or engaged in virtual meetings due to security issues. But still, for the Prime Minister, who so often said this,
now is not the time to travel.
The trip leaves some Canadians unimpressed, like this couple, regular snowbirds, forced to skip the last trip to Florida.
He won't let any of us go anywhere.
And on that quarantine hotel, his office will only say that he's following public health guidelines. Trudeau himself said he was staying in a, quote, government-approved airport hotel, but no such venues exist in Ottawa, according to the government's own website. Donna?
Abigail Bimman, thanks. The federal Liberals have a new MP, the MP from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Jenica Atwin, who was elected as a Green Party member, has abandoned the Greens and joined the Liberals. The defection leaves the Green Party with just 2 MPs in the House of Commons. Mike Drolet is with me from Ottawa. Mike?
Well, Donna, with this move, the Green Party loses 1/3 of its caucus, and someone party insiders say could have represented the future of the Green movement.
I'm Jenica. I'm from Fredericton, and I have the same priorities and the same values that I've always had.
Jenica Atwin says she's the same MP, but now she has very different political stripes. The rising star of the Greens is leaving behind a party in turmoil with a leader who still doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons.
There will have to be a lot of soul searching done within the party to see why Jenica felt this was her only course of action.
And that soul searching will include how internal divisions have become very public recently. Last month, when the Green Party had called for de-escalation in the Middle East and a return to dialogue, in a tweet, Atwin labeled her leader's statement as totally inadequate, saying she stood with Palestinians and called for an end to apartheid.
I mentioned distraction. It's been really difficult to focus on the important work that needs to be done on behalf of my constituents, so it certainly has played a role.
The longtime Liberal who helped announce Atwin's defection says the party is welcoming her and her views with open arms.
In the Liberal caucus, there is enormous room for respectful conversation, for differences of opinion.
Late Thursday, Green Party leader Annamie Paul expressed disappointment at Atwin's departure, but doesn't believe it's a reflection on her leadership.
She wished me well, that she hoped that we would remain friends, and so I will take her at her word that this is a decision she took for other reasons.
Now, the timing of this couldn't be worse for the Greens. The party is losing its star MP while planning for the possibility of a fall election. Donna?
All right, Mike Drolet, thanks. Canada's Privacy Commissioner has concluded the RCMP seriously breached privacy laws by using facial recognition software to collect the personal information of Canadians. The Privacy Commissioner, Daniel Thirion, tabled his report in Parliament today after investigating the RCMP's use of the software from the US-based company Clearview AI. The software cross-references images of people against billions of photos taken from the internet without their consent. The Commissioner concluded the use of facial recognition technology by the RCMP to search through massive repositories of Canadians who are innocent of any suspicion of crime presents a serious violation of privacy. The RCMP at first denied using Clearview AI, but last year admitted it had been. It's still not clear what for. The domino is now falling that Keystone XL is dead. Coming up, what it means for Alberta's Premier and the taxpayer dollars he invested. It's been a bad week for Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. First, he apologized for flouting COVID rules at a dinner on the Sky Palace balcony. New polling shows his approval rating at a new low, and now the Keystone XL Pipeline expansion, which he invested in, is officially dead. It was first proposed in 2008. The 1,900-kilometer pipeline would have carried crude from Alberta to Nebraska and then tied in with an existing pipeline carrying crude to the U.S. Gulf Coast. Just last year, Kenney announced a $1.5 billion investment in the project and $6 billion in loan guarantees. President Biden pulled the permits for the project, and yesterday, TC Energy canceled it. Global's Tom Vernon is with me from Edmonton. Tom, before we get to Keystone, I want to ask you about a report in an Alberta online publication that Premier Kenney and others in his cabinet broke COVID-19 rules by having multiple dinners indoors. Kenney was asked about that today. What did he say?
Well, Donna, a digital media outlet quotes unnamed sources inside the UCP government that accused the Premier of hosting these dinners at restaurants as well as at a private residence while the restrictions were in place, not allowing this to happen. Now, the Premier was quick to deny these allegations, and they sent a cease and desist letter to the outlet.
This is a complete fabrication, and that's why our legal counsel has written to that website demanding a full and immediate retraction and apology.
Now, the Premier, or Global News, has not verified these allegations. Now, the Premier did add that he has had meals out at restaurants during the pandemic while the rules did allow to show support for the industry. He did so either on his own or with one of his designated close contacts.
Okay, and Tom, back to Keystone now. What happens to the taxpayer money that Kenney invested in, and what are the possible political consequences?
Yeah, Donna, as of right now, Alberta taxpayers are on the hook for about $1.3 billion. That's according to the Premier. And the government and TC Energy are looking for ways to recoup some of that cost from the Biden administration. Now, the Premier says Alberta has a case to make under the free trade agreement between the two countries, and we'll learn more about that towards the end of July. Now, this comes as an Angus Reid poll shows the Premier has the lowest support for all premiers in the country at 31%. And if an election were held today, the opposition NDP would win a majority government. And to the right of the Premier, the Wild Rose Conservative Party would have 20% support. Donna?
All right, Tom Vernon in Edmonton. Thanks. Still ahead, what you need to know about another disease carried by ticks. Lyme disease, which is primarily spread by deer ticks, has received a lot of attention and has made lots of people sick. But there is another disease spread by ticks that is less well known. Jamie Morocker explains what it is and why experts say we should be tracking it here in Canada.
There we go. Justin Wood is testing ticks to make sure others avoid the pain he says one bug bite has caused him.
I'm not really kind of feeling like myself and pretty much no energy to do anything ever.
After suffering a range of strange symptoms, in 2015, Wood was diagnosed with Lyme disease.
It kind of took my whole life from me.
To get it back, he started genetics. Running a small lab from his Southern Ontario home, he looks for pathogens. And recently, the 33-year-old says he's noticed the emergence of a new illness.
We're starting to find that new species of the bacteria that causes babesiosis exist.
Babesiosis is caused by Babesia, a tiny parasite that affects blood. In Canada, the first case of babesiosis was diagnosed in a child in Manitoba in 2013. Yale research scientist Dr. Peter Krause says while it often presents as flu-like symptoms, for some, it can carry up to a 20% risk of death.
So people who don't have a spleen, people with cancer, people who have HIV/AIDS, and also the extremes of age, newborn infants and people over the age of 60, tend to have more severe disease.
Stateside, Krause says babesiosis is already endemic in certain areas thanks to the growing black-legged tick population. Robin Lindsay, a scientist at the National Microbiology Lab, says Manitoba is seeing a potential incursion of cross-border bugs from Minnesota.
That's why the infection rate's a bit higher.
There, babesiosis is found in 5% of ticks versus 1% in the rest of the country, says Lindsay.
You're just seeing, as a consequence of tick populations growing, into new areas, that you're seeing the emergence of these particular pathogens.
Wood has already discovered babesiosis in ticks in Ontario and expects to soon see it in Nova Scotia. Now he says Canada needs more testing to keep track of the trends.
My hope is that we'll have better treatment
for his disease and the ones to come. Jimmy Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Mount Recycle More next. The pressure on G7 leaders to deal with electronic waste. This was a case of swift justice. On Tuesday, a man slapped French President Emmanuel Macron in the face. Today, that man was sentenced to 4 months in jail. The 28-year-old claims he didn't plan to slap Macron, but says he was filled with disgust when he saw the president face to face. Well, Macron's face, along with the other G7 leaders, are staring back at them from across the water at the G7 summit in Cornwall. A massive Mount Rushmore-style sculpture has been created with scraps of electronic waste. It was commissioned by a British retailer that sells second-hand electronics, but it does have a political message. Crystal Gamansing reports.
It's a twist on the mounting issue of electronic waste, and all eyes are now on those who can do something about it.
Let's try and build things that we can repair,
Let's build things that last longer. Let's, not have to have the newest thing every time. But, let's find a ways of dealing with this before we just get buried under it.
Mount Recycle More, like many of Joe Rush's creations, is born of his environmental and anti-consumerism beliefs. E-waste may not be top of mind for most, but it has a huge impact. Those who work in the world of recycled electronics want people to see its weight.
It's 53 million tonnes of e-waste that's created every year, of which the G7 contributes about 40% of that currently.
A shiny metal likeness of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with his counterparts, is not only eye-catching, nestled along the English seaside, it's a wake-up call to demand more of leaders, says this environmentalist.
Time and time again, we come across cases where they say the right things and then do the opposite, which is very frustrating and is sort of biding time, wasting time, when we really need to be making fundamental changes in the way we live.
A fridge or a Hoover or could last 20 years. It doesn't have to be thrown away so quickly, and hopefully this will draw people's attention to the fact.
The scrapyard sculpture is drawing attention. Climate is supposed to be a key pillar of the political gathering underway in Cornwall.
Climate change is going badly, so countries need to sort it out.
The pressure now is on G7 leaders to build lasting policy and not just reduce urgent environmental issues to scraps. Crystal Gamanson, Global News, London.
And that's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Depending on where you live in Canada, you may have seen a stunning sight in the sky early this morning. It was a ring of fire eclipse. The moon blocked out all but a sliver of the rising sun. Some stunning images. Thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you on Saturday for the new reality. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.